Jennifer, and where my audience, sorry, can find you.
Okay, so I go by J Rosemarie online. That's where I'm most recognized as J Rosemarie on Facebook and Instagram at J Rosemarie1. I'm the host of two podcasts, Solo Moms Talk and the tools of the podcast trade. I also blog at jrosemarie.com, and it's kind of like my brand, J Rosemarie. And I'm a solo mom, empty nester solo mom. So I blog and talk about all those things and the health of women.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that introduction. So I guess my first question to you, because it's something that I know the men on my side of the world speak a little bit about, but to have the conversation between a man and a woman, I'd love to ask you this question. So what are some of the myths about single parenting, but more specifically about single motherhood that you'd like to debunk today?
Well, I think the biggest one is where so when if I could step back a bit, when I first did some research on Solo Moms Talk, I I wanted to see what was out there about single motherhood. And the what was out there wasn't good. It wasn't pleasant. And the single mom was depicted as, this lazy, good for nothing, other words that just was on welfare, and they were a certain race, and nothing could be further from the truth. Right. So I went deeper into it. This is why my podcast is called Solo Moms Talk, because we forget that moms raising children alone didn't always choose to raise their kids alone. They're divorced, they're widowed. Some of them are still married, and but daddy just is selfish and minding his own business and not supporting the mother with the child, even when they're together. So this is where solo moms come in. So single moms, if we could revert back to the name, are not lazy, good for nothing women who got pregnant, because they're careless. Single moms, encompass a lot of different women in different situations.
I know for me, and maybe because I have a more positive outlook on parenthood, motherhood, and fatherhood, is that my perception of single mothers and single fathers was a little bit different than what was portrayed to me. And I'll give you an example. On TV, single mothers and single fathers are like the armpit of society, right? They're viewed a certain way. Both are considered lazy. Some are considered deadbeats. So you'd have like the single fathers, or that's a deadbeat dad. You have the single mothers, or that's a promiscuous woman. You have all these different views.
Yes.
But when I started to interact with single mothers and single fathers, they're some of the most hardworking people you know.
Yes.
They're dedicated, they're understanding. And my definition of a single mother is someone that would have a child out of wedlock. Like someone who is married and has children and they divorce, I wouldn't call that a single mother. Someone who's had children and they're widowed, I wouldn't call that a single mother. I'll call that person did it the way that traditionally is set up for the most successful outcome for the child. And on your podcast, when you're discussing some of these topics from the single mom's perspective, is there a conversation that originates for single motherhood, meaning in support, and then there's, okay, what can we do to maybe combat some of the more negative perceptions of single parenthood or single motherhood in this case?
Okay, so like I said, I don't particularly focus on single mothers. I don't single out, pun intended, single mothers, right? So because I know sometimes people live with regret, even when they have a child out of wedlock, they may still be living with regrets because of life has become challenging, and that's not the way they planned it. It just happened that way. Like I said, I I I gave the name of my podcast Solo Moms Talk because it's a mom raising her children solo. Right? So I put everybody under the same umbrella. So I hope that answered your question.
No, it does, because
Okay.
you gave the example, and this is probably me confirming it. You can be in a marriage and raising the child solo.
Exactly.
That doesn't necessarily mean you're a single parent. I understand. So it would
Yes.
be like, let's say if you and I are married and I'm raising the child and you're out there working, or you're out there doing something else outside of the child rearing duties. I would
Yes.
be a solo father because
Yes.
I'm taking care of the needs. Okay. So as a solo mother now, is that dynamic different when it's someone who's in a relationship versus someone who is not in one?
So you're meaning the male partners in the home? Is that what you're
Yes, yes.
referring
So
to?
in this case, the father is present, but he's not active, which is a difference.
Okay, so I still consider that solo. I'll give you an example. One of our guests was Allison. Allison was married for 15 years and she had 2 kids with her husband. Her husband still lived in the home, but he created 2 other families outside. And he was more interested in the families, the kids that he created outside, than he was with the kids he created with his wife. Okay. Allison, in my opinion, is a solo mom. There's another lady who she was the same thing. Her husband didn't work outside the home, but she took care of the kids, worked outside the home, and came home and took care of the kids and him. That's the solo mother.
Okay,
So,
that makes sense to me. So how does a solo mother navigate their life in that situation that you just described?
well, in that's a tough one. That's a really tough one because I've been there. And what I did personally was focus on my children. And it came a time when it became a problem for the husband because I think he thought he was a child too, and that I should be taking care of him. And so if it was a case where he just minded his own business, I probably would have ignored him until the children were old enough, to be on their own. But because he wanted me to assume maternal responsibilities for him, then that wasn't going to work. And it became war. And so that was the end of the marriage. And I'm just talking about it from my perspective, my experience, because that's all I can talk about. But I think if you're in that position and the marriage is not working, and you want a marriage, because sometimes you're there and you're comfortable, even if the situation is not comfortable, you're comfortable in the situation. I don't know if you get that. So you let it slide and years pass, and one day you wake up and the kids are old enough and they don't need you that much anymore, so you both go your own ways. But it might not be a comfortable situation, right? And so you have to look at your life and see what kind of example you want for your children, one, and number two, what kind of life you want for you as a person, as a woman in that situation. And I mean, the reverse is for men, but like I said, my podcast is for moms, not dads. So I'm not a dad, so I can only speak from a mom's perspective. Never had a father, so I have no experience with that, right? So you as a mother in a situation where dad is in the house but only physically, that you're going to have to take control of that situation if you're not comfortable with it. Because some people are, they don't, they're like, they might, everybody's on their own track, on their own road, right? And so you just have to decide what works for you and what doesn't.
That reminds me of a relationship where I became comfortable even though I knew it wasn't the best situation for me to be in.
Right.
And I think there's so many of us that when we kind of like negotiate within ourselves, right? We would
Yes.
say, you know what, Jennifer, I know this isn't working out, but you're the lesser of two evils because what's
Right.
out there
Yes.
is the devil. What's
Yeah.
in here is kind of the quasi devil. So,
Yes.
I know this struggle. I
Yes.
don't know that struggle.
Right.
And I came to a point because I don't have any children, and I came to the point where, like you mentioned, you're sitting back one day, you open your eyes, and you're like, "What the hell am I doing here?"
Right.
Right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
it just doesn't make sense to you anymore.
Right.
Did you reach that point? And if so, was that your type of revelation to yourself where like, I got to get out of this?
Yes. And I think it happens in different ways, but it happened to me in the sense that I married for relationship. I married for companionship. And the things that we discussed before we got married were forgotten when we were married. And I'm kind of a stickler for the rules sometimes. I'm like, I expect you to keep your word, right? Now, I can be flexible, but I expect you to keep your word. And when my life is getting left behind because you decide you're going to just do your own thing, then, we're going to have a problem. At least because I don't want to just sit around and do not and live a life of nothingness. I like to live a life that means something, you know. And so I kind of forgotten your question, but I think I may have answered it anyway. So
No, you did. And for me, I'm very similar. When I get into a relationship, I say, okay, this is what I want. I want someone not to make me happy, but to make sure they're not making me unhappy.
right.
I can make myself happy. I'm
Yes.
very good at making myself happy.
Yes.
Right? And two is I want to make sure that the person I'm with is whatever it is that they're doing from a career or financial standpoint, that they're able to maintain that. Because if you can take care of yourself when we get together, I'm just I'm just a complement to it. I'm not here to supplement it. Meaning that all of a sudden, when you start dating with you and I start dating, you're like, okay, I'm going to quit my job because I'm going to live off of terrain. No, you're not going to live off of me, right? I don't. I
Yeah,
have a
yeah, yeah,
dog, and
yeah.
she costs me enough money. I don't need a grown man or woman child to take care of, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I think you raised a good point where sometimes, even though we get into relationships with the best of intentions, and we get into relationships with dating with purpose, and we outline and say, hey, this is what I want. Can you fulfill this?
Yeah.
What some people I think miss is the fact that you agreed to the terms and conditions before we proceeded. Now, if you don't want to honor it, that should allow me to go my separate way
Yeah.
peacefully.
Broken
So
contract. Yeah.
exactly. Was that when you speak to women now, pulling from your own experience, do you help them to view it that way, making sure that their boundaries are set and maintained?
I try, but I also don't, being a Christian, I I don't encourage divorce, right? Unless the situation is, it's just impossible. Like if he's cheating, then he's broken his contract. And if he's beating you, he's broken his contract. And there are other things that may be considered the contract broken. But I think people should work a little harder on marriage. You know, this and I'm saying that from somebody who's been divorced 3 times, right? I'm going to say that. But I still don't like it. I look back and wondered if there was a time I could just hold, you know, and just take my time, before we called it quits. Because when you're in a marriage with the right person, I think it's just amazing, right? But you're with someone else. It's another human being with their own thoughts and dreams and you know, and thought patterns. And until you become one, thinking the same way, having the same purpose, it's going to take work. And even when you're on the same page, it takes work, right? But I think nowadays we're too quick to say, he's not pleasing me. You know, she's not pleasing me. Time to move on. And I don't agree with that. I still don't, you know.
For those who are watching on Facebook, social media, and my YouTube channel, please stay tuned for more incredible interviews with the passionate and very honest Jennifer. And we will be back for more. So stay tuned.